I'm sharing the agenda, but I'm gonna take that down now. And since there's only 16 of us, let's do a quick round of introductions. Just share who you are and who you're representing today. Elizabeth.
Good morning. My name is Elizabeth Baxter. I am the manager of disaster recovery and economic development planning at Miami Valley Regional Planning Commission, and I am supporting Matt with the climate pollution reduction grant planning process.
Darren.
Sorry, it took me a minute to get to the mute button. I'm Darren Crockett. I'm with SSG, and I'm part of the CPRG grant activity. And I'm happy to be here. Thanks.
Robin.
Hi, I'm Robin. I am the new intern at MVRPC. This is my first week, and that's all there is to it.
Welcome, Robin. Kobe.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Kobe Williams with New Reach Community Consulting, and I'm a partner with SSG on the grant consulting team. Thank you.
Rap.
I'm Rap Hankins. I'm the president of Drive Electric Dayton.
Francisca.
Morning, everybody. I'm Francisca Cid. I'm in the consulting team of SSG, supporting with the analyst team.
Eric.
Hi, Eric Linder. I'm with the Ohio Department of Development.
Yule.
I'm Yule Herbert, principal with SSG, also working on the climate pollution reduction grant.
Bob.
Yeah, Bob Downs. I generally work with the faith community, although I have also worked with partners.
Shadrick.
Good morning, all. I'm Shadrick Adams. I'm the Director of Environmental Health at Greene County Public Health.
Thank you. Matt Shimp.
Hi, I'm Matt Shimp. I'm the Research Manager with the Dayton Development Coalition.
Thank you. Kevin. So Kevin is with the City of Piqua. Thank you, Kevin. Jackson.
Jackson Bennett, Miami County Department of Development.
Chip.
Chip Wig with the City of Germantown.
Thank you for being here today. And Miami County Public Health.
Good morning. This is Jane Thompson. I'm the Environmental Health Director.
Hi, Jane. Thanks for being here. Okay. So this, as a follow-up to our presentation that we had in the March meeting about the Southwest Regional Water study being proposed by Ohio EPA, we pulled together a panel of two speakers from local development or statewide development organizations to share with us some other insights about how water capacities of all kinds factor in development decisions and site selection decisions. And I want to thank Elizabeth Baxter, who worked so hard to work with these two agencies and arrange and discuss with them what we were getting at and finding the right speakers from each agency. So I appreciate all Elizabeth's work on that. So we're going to start with Matt Shimp from the Dayton Development Coalition.
Great, thank you. Again, my name is Matt Shimp. I'm a research manager with the Dayton Development Coalition, and I'm also very involved in site development work and site selection activity, working with Jobs Ohio. So I'll just start out by saying, echo the topic that was sent out. Regionally speaking and statewide, we are seeing a wide number of projects, especially data centers and other manufacturers who require sometimes 100 million gallons of water a day for cooling purposes. However, most communities, will not have that type of capacity available. So from a development standpoint, Regionally, as you all are well aware, we're regionally blessed with massive groundwater reserves. However, the availability to a industrial park or a commercial park is very dependent on many things. It can be the size of the pipe, the slope, how far away it is from the site being proposed, and many things like that. When we work with site selectors, we use a lot of terms about water and water capacity, but the one that we use and rely on most often is what we call excess water capacity. And I think the definition sometimes escapes, or it's a misunderstood definition of what we're talking about when we say excess capacity. So when we say excess capacity, what we're referring to is essentially what is the design capacity for the water plant minus what is currently being used, what is currently being processed by that plant. That, in essence, gives you what the excess capacity is. However, it may not be that full number. Like I mentioned earlier, there are a number of factors that play into what that capacity actually is, what that line size is, et cetera, et cetera. So with this trend of heavy water use projects coming in, we strongly encourage our communities to have a strong understanding of what their water capacities are when considering submitting a site for one of these large projects. For example, if a company were to come to us with a project needing 8 million gallons of water per day, but the site currently only has 6 or 5 or whatever that number is, we expect communities to be able to be prepared to describe what that cost and timeline would look like, what their ability to do that looks like, how are they going to finance such a project and things like that. So, with all these projects needing an abundance of water, we urge communities to be very diligent and have a very close understanding of what their community can offer and what its potential capacity in the future may be before submitting for these projects. And that's about all I had that I wanted to touch on. I don't know if anyone from the group has any specific questions.
Matt, can I ask you to speak to how this group here can engage with other departments within their community, such as the local economic development group or others that may be thinking about working with Dayton Development Coalition or the state of Ohio to bring in larger capacity water users? What kind of things should this group be thinking about, being that they're focused on wastewater, water usage? What sort of things should they be focused on, and conversations should they be having with the local economic development group to ensure that, we don't have miscommunication and start channels of bringing in a larger group that can't support necessarily what we have? Or what tips do you have to ensure that this group can develop a strong relationship with the local economic development arm to ensure everybody's priorities kind of match up?
Yeah. So depending on your role, if you're economic development or in a support position in economic development, we just generally advise a very strong working relationship between your economic development director and your public works director, or maybe that's your water engineer and things like that. Just so that whenever a project comes in that calls for a high amount of water, we can call on that public works person, someone that has that expertise that can answer those complicated questions about treatment of water, what the capacities are, what the future potential design capacities could be, and things like that. So I guess in general, just encouraging a strong relationship between cross departments in the site selection world, and being able to land one of these projects is heavily rely on having a strong team approach. And that means having your water department, economic development department, and several other departments on the same page.
And then, oh, sorry, go ahead, Matt. I was just going to ask, are there any specifics that this group should be thinking about as it pertains to water capacity with some of the different priorities that are around the region related to economic development?
Yeah, I guess, you just, yeah, well, you really just have to decide for your community what kind of projects you want to go after. If you don't have a large industrial site, there's a chance that you're probably not going to be in that arena competing for some of these large development projects. But if you're a community that does have large industrial sites, that has industrial zoning, is meant for manufacturing, those are the sites that we advise having a strong relationship cross department. Sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought there.
So Matt, it's my impression that a lot of communities don't build a lot of excess capacity without knowing that they're going to have the customer.
Right.
So what is the lead time on some of these big projects? There's a big project coming, it needs a lot of water. How long in the future is it when they're going to actually need the water? How much time is there?
It can be really project specific, case by case. But in general, it can be anywhere from 6 to 24 months is what we see. Timelines are definitely accelerated these days. But I think as a community, you have to consider, do we want to be a large water provider community? There's a lot of things that come along with those types of projects for data centers and large manufacturing. And you have to consider what you currently have, what your infrastructure currently looks like, to see if it's even scalable to meet the needs of some of these projects. So future planning, capacity planning, evaluating what is the maximum that we could process reasonably with our current infrastructure, or doing a study.
And I understand that this also goes for wastewater, right?
Correct.
In terms of capacities for wastewater treatment, but also that there are industries now that are asking for treated wastewater for like cooling water because they don't want to use potable water for that for various reasons. So there's this potential that there's a reuse for treated wastewater.
Yeah, we are seeing that pop up on various projects. I wouldn't say it's very common, but I guess I would say that as a community, if you're responding to site selection projects, going after some of these larger projects, to be prepared to, how would you answer that question as a community? Do you have systems in place that can provide treated wastewater? Or would massive investments have to be done, massive planning would have to be done in order to do that, and consider that against the project timeline?
Thanks, Matt. Are there any questions from anyone else for Matt?
Matt, this is Rap Hankins, the Drive Electric Dayton. My question is, if when the state looks at these massive projects that require a lot of water, who are the agencies that really look at the environmental impact upon communities and our water capacity when we're inviting these groups into the region and particularly into the state? Because there has to be a balance. We've seen in some states where water plants have come in and people with huge amounts of water have been taken out, put into plastic bottles, and shipped in other places. So my question is, we want manufacturing, but we want intelligent manufacturing, which is good for the community and the state and the environment. So how do we make sure we have the correct balance where it's good for the environment as well as good for the economy?
Sure. So as a state agency, Jobs Ohio is compelled to provide economic development opportunities for the state. And so their expertise doesn't always look at environmental. Various types of projects will have various types of environmental impact, some greater than others. Some communities are much better equipped to handle those types of wastewater or other environmental factors, or maybe more willing to welcome that kind of project into their community. Other communities are much more decisive about what kinds of projects they will accept into their communities or even bid for. Especially, so if you're a smaller community that has very limited development sites, and you have the choice between a potentially environmentally harmful project and one that you expect to be of your clean manufacturing, you as a community, you kind of have that advantage of being able to choose what you do with your sites. Granted, that kind of property ownership comes into play there as well, but it really comes down to the communities having a clear understanding of what their environmental standards are for development sites. I hope that answers your question.
Anyone else? Hearing none. Well, Matt, I know you need to run to another meeting, but I appreciate you sharing the perspective of the Dayton Development Coalition with our group today.
Of course. And if anyone has follow-up questions, Matt, you're welcome to provide them my email.
Okay. Thanks very much.
All
right.
Thanks, everybody.
Our second speaker on this topic is Eric Lindner from the Ohio Department of Development. Eric, you should be able to share your screen.
Great, thanks. So yeah, let me try to get that pulled up here. So I will talk a little bit more about some programming, some funding opportunity. There we go. That really basically is like an add-on, so to speak, to some of the things that you just heard about. So if you're a local community and you've decided that you have some site that you would like to prepare from a development and site readiness standpoint, but may need some infrastructure or capacity needs, water being a big component of that, this is a potential funding program for that to utilize. Or in the same vein, if you're trying to attract a large scale manufacturer specifically, and you have somebody identified to fit a project, again, this is something that can help support to increase some of those utility capacities at sites. So I'll go through these slides fairly quickly. There's a lot of information on this, but we can obviously make these available to share later on for you guys, and they're also available on our program webpage. So All Have Future Fund is really a program to make strategic investments across the state to increase the project-ready development sites. It was an initiative of Governor DeWine. We have nearly $750 million for this program, which sounds like a lot of money, but as you guys may be aware, a lot of these projects from a large-scale infrastructure standpoint are tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars to get all the utilities and capacities needed for large-scale sites. And really, this particular program is targeted to attract new businesses and basically create that site readiness, that site inventory. Really quickly to go through this, who's eligible to apply are counties, municipalities, townships, port authorities, CICs, a whole host. It can also be for-profit organizations that are basically partnering with a local community. Some of the eligible costs of the program are public road work, the water and wastewater, which is probably most impactful to this group, design and engineering, demolition, wetland mitigation, utility connection, and then other one-time site enhancements. Just from a process standpoint, these are generally going to be done through a potential forgivable loan program. Is how these are going to be set up for the applicants. So they have to demonstrate the ability to undertake the project. One of the big things we're looking for is county and local support. So really, we want these to be locally driven projects that everyone is on board with. And so when you guys are talking a little bit about the environmental impact and that consideration, we want to make sure that the local community is driving that decision and that impact. And then really a clear definition on the scope. So the costs, the site capacities, who the site is being marketed to from an end user standpoint. The things we're going to consider for this program are the economic impact of the project, the local community's ability to support the project, the types of jobs that are created, the importance to the economic development for the region, and then whether or not the land is publicly owned and controlled or whether it's privately owned. That'll be a factor that we consider. And then really the other mechanism to this, just for your guys' awareness, is there's a potential recapture if an end user is not identified for 5 years, but that's really on the project side. So maybe not quite as topical to this group. Provisions in our guidelines and how some folks may be pulled into this. Again, we have an indication of interest, which is basically our application for the program. We would be looking for letters of support and resolutions from the local community on that for undertaking a project. And then one of the scopes really is looking at the acreage and whether that's contiguous or not, what the electrical capacities are, what the gas capacity is, and then also, again, related to this group, the water capacity, wastewater capacity. So, is there a site that currently has, 1 million gallons per day that you would like to increase up to 8 million gallons per day to attract an end user, right? And so this would be a program to potentially utilize for that increase. Some of our key provisions to the guidelines, we have a preference for projects that are where the property is under public ownership or control. And that can include an option to purchase. And then if it is under private control, we would be looking for some sort of agreement with that private landowner to help in the cost of the project due to the benefit they may receive upon the sale or lease of the land that they may have. No more than 20% of our project may be composed of retail, entertainment, multifamily, higher education, or commercial office space. Really, we're looking at that large-scale manufacturing type of project, focused really on Jobs Ohio's 10 industry sectors, which I'll touch on here in a little bit. Some of our factors in the evaluation process for determining what projects to support. Again, we've set this up in a preference model, so a wide range of eligibility and generalization of the program, but some preferences that we're looking at. So sites with 200 plus acres, 500,000 gallons per day of water capacity, 500,000 gallons per day of sewer capacity, wastewater capacity. There you see the gas and electrical thresholds as well. So those are preferences, so to speak. Obviously, each site is going to be individually different, and each project with potential end users is going to be different. Really, we're leaving this up to local communities to drive what they think is appropriate for the site and the size of the site, what is available from a capacity standpoint and what makes sense, and then ultimately what end user or type of end user they're targeting. So, as mentioned, we are looking to support projects in one of Jobs Ohio's targeted industries that you see listed there. And then that sort of repeats the same with the preference of projects that are locally owned. So again, trying to have the local community drive these projects and the type of projects and who ultimately they want from an end user in their community. As far as preferences, again, for the program, we are looking to create a more even distribution of economic impact projects across the state. So we'll consider that. We do want to see broad local, private, and public support and then alignment of that. So, whether or not this regional sort of group participates in that support or not, whether it fits the regional plan, and then specifically from the local and county level as well. We're also going to look at labor and talent resources to fill the vacant use. So obviously we want to make sure that the community has the bandwidth, both from current and then future capacity from a workforce standpoint, and then other programs that the project may be benefiting from. We do have a secondary preference for sites larger than 30 acres, but again, there is no minimum acreage to apply for this program. Sort of touched on some of these other things. We're going to consider the jobs, the payroll, the investments of the program, the local community support, and the workforce capabilities and housing for that workforce, the quality of jobs, so the median wage created for the project, and then again, if the ownership is private or public on the land that's being developed. We mentioned that these are going to be done primarily through loan programs. Basically funding up to 75% of a project cost. We envision these being 0% interest loans for up to 20 years, basically with disbursements done in advance on a quarterly basis. When we are going to do our forgivability consideration, we're going to look at a couple of things. One is the ultimate end user who is successfully identified within 5 years of the funding opportunity. Whether or not the wages of that end user are 25% above the median county wage. And then if that end user operates in one of Jobs Ohio's 10 targeted sectors. We are currently accepting indications of interest at this point in time. So we're going through our initial review process of that. We're going to work with our partners at Jobs Ohio. We're going to work with EPA, a whole host of, state agencies and organizations to try to help make sure we're understanding these projects appropriately, that they're viable projects and make sense collectively from a state, regional, and local perspective. If approved, they do have to go through a controlling board process, and then we will have some reporting mechanisms to that. So that's essentially the end of the actual presentation about the program. How it maybe fits into this group, maybe a little more tangentially is really, it's an add-on to some of the stuff Matt was talking about. You have the planning aspect of determining whether or not a local community wants to attract this type of project, what sort of capacities they currently have, what the increase in those capacities would need to be in order to make that happen, and that this would be a funding mechanism potentially to support that growth and opportunity. We have a preference for projects that have a targeted end user, in part because we don't want to overbuild or underbuild from a utility standpoint, and then also we don't necessarily want to speculatively build and then that site sit vacant for an extended period of time. So we do have a preference for that, but this can be, targeted speculative projects. So community has a plot of land that they would like to develop for site readiness standpoint, and really provide meaningful utilities. This could be a program to potentially pursue. Any questions?
Thank you, Eric. Are there any questions for Eric about the All Ohio Future Fund? Okay. Hearing none. Yes, if you would, if you could send me a PDF of these slides, that would be appreciated.
Yeah, absolutely can do.
Okay. All right.
All right, Matt, did I get off your screen there?
Yes, you did. Thank you.
All right. All right, thank you.
I'm going to go back to sharing our agenda just briefly. This out of my way. Okay, so our next item under the water quality planning topic is to discuss the facility planning area update process. There are not many of you on this call that manage facility planning areas, but we're interested in comments from everyone. The rest of the packet is that memo. It's a draft memo that indicates the process for how we're going to develop, review, and eventually approve or adopt any updates to our facility planning areas within our region. I am interested in your comments on that memo, and I'm inviting you to send me comments. We can speak up now, but to send me comments by May 24th, a couple Fridays from now, or 3 Fridays from now. Yep. 2.5 weeks from now, if you have any comments on these. Since not many of you here are responsible for wastewater management, I will just say a facility planning area is basically a geographic area within which a particular community is responsible for the planning and the financing, construction, maintenance, operation of wastewater collection and treatment systems. And from time to time, because of development, like we were just speaking of, or other reasons, the boundary of that area for which they wish to be responsible needs to change. Typically, it gets bigger, but it could be that they're transferring area to another management agency. And so this is a memo that describes the process for submitting, and any of those changes results in being a change to the region's water quality plan that has to be approved by the MVRPC board ultimately. So this memo describes the process for developing and proposing such a change and how it would get reviewed and eventually approved, and the timeline. And this committee, the Water and Environment Subcommittee, would be the first regional body that would be asked to take a look at the proposal and provide any comment on that. We would expect that the proposal would have been vetted within the local community beforehand. So anyway, this memo details that timeline and the process, and attached to it is our policy that was adopted back in 2005. So it's not really an update. It's just the same policy. For how one develops and submits such a change. After I receive any comments, I'll incorporate those comments into this memo and then issue it as sort of a final by the end of May. I will be sending this out specifically to all of the wastewater treatment operators across the region later today, just to make sure that since they aren't here, that they have the draft and they have the opportunity to submit any comments. Are there any questions about that? I will stop sharing. Well, hearing none, again, if you have any comments about that process or that memo, you can send them to me in the next couple of weeks. With that, we will turn over to our climate topics. And our consultants from Sustainability Solutions Group, SSG, and New Reach Consulting in Columbus are here to guide us through a couple of topics, one of which is scenario building, and then the other is our engagement process that we'll be using going forward. So I'll turn it over to whoever is going to speak first.
Thanks, Matt. I'm going to share my screen. So all of you, do you see them? Do you see the screen? Sorry. Okay, so this is an update on the comprehensive climate action plan process that we've been taking with Miami Valley. Just a reminder that the team is you, who is the project lead, and it's going to be Darren, who is in charge of modeling, Kobe is supporting on the engagement side, and I'm the main ally analyst. So we have two topics to cover today. First one is the engagement process and engagement plan specifically that will be shown by Kobe, and then we have a scenario design and low carbon scenario context and conceptual context, and then we have a small activity plan for you. Just a few housekeeping rules, so you can use the chat anytime to ask your questions, and we'll be reading you. And then you can also raise your hand to speak during the feedback period. So after Kobe and you talk, we're gonna have some few minutes left to have questions. Kobe, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, thank you, Fran, and hello again, everyone. So the last time that we met with this body, which I believe was in March, at that time, we covered the pre-engagement findings. So there was a pre-engagement process that happened and concluded late last year, late 2023, and we previewed some of the thinking behind, or initial thinking behind the subsequent engagement guide, which I will provide an overview for now. So to connect the two, the preceding process is informed of the content and information that you'll receive now. And in some cases, it may be a bit of a refresher, but it has some refinement to it as well. And the slide that you see in front of you is the first set of objectives of the engagement plan. As a practitioner, I know you need to have a reason that you're engaging and things that you hope to achieve subsequent with that engagement. And I'll also note that these objectives are not in chronological order, or at least not in terms of priority. It's more so for reference. And starting with objective 1, it's to increase the awareness among really the community at large about our activities is kind of the gist of this. A leading reason, I know this as a national expert on an engagement field, a leading reason why folks do not engage in things is because they don't have enough information to do so. And information goes beyond just, hey, we're meeting Wednesday at 6:30. They quite literally need enough information to walk in the door with. And we'll touch on this momentarily, but also that the information is relevant to them and their perspective. So that's largely what objective 1 speaks to. Additional objective there covered in objective 2 is to build partnerships and alignment as well. Partnerships is really kind of relationships building, which is a primary goal of really, in my mind, any engagement activity or process, but you also want to ensure that what you're engaging about aligns with the needs, interests, and or priorities of the communities, the populations that you're engaging with. So our plan reflects different processes to actually do that. What is important to the communities, what are the communities experiencing, and aligning that with a lot of the information that we'll be covering in this meeting and subsequent meetings. So not just about what we want, what we know, but it's a relationship. What does the community want, know, and how do they think about their experiences? Next slide, please. So objective 3 covers, really speaks to transparency in terms of providing decision-making opportunities for the community at large, which will be a continual process, so that we're not just, the community is not just hearing from our team or us collectively, you know, at the tail end of a process where we're just literally presenting information to them. The processes will be informed by the community, they will be influenced by the community, and they will be invited to actually be a part of decision-making processes as those come to light. Objective 4 speaks to being very intentional and deliberate with how we engage with various communities. Touched on this when we were together a couple of months ago and provided some supporting information and research to that regard. It's very important that we engage with communities in ways that make sense for them and make sense to them. And particularly with a lot of the so-called Justice 40, etc. communities. Analogy I give with those communities in particular, just because you give a cat dog food and meowed when you do it, don't expect them to necessarily be receptive to that. It has to make sense to the audience and population that you're targeting. Different communities, particularly racial and ethnic communities, quite literally think, behave, and have different preferences of how they operate and go into the world. Speaks to axiology, which is the nature of what people value. Epistemology, which speaks to knowledge and what is the source and scope of knowledge and understanding, as well as just logic and process. It's very important to cater engagement, comms, and outreach to those populations in ways, again, that make sense for them, which largely would fundamentally different than perhaps in dominant cultures. Next slide, please. So this is literally at a glance information of a summary of activities from a robust engagement guide. And the engagement is really encompassed in 3 phases. The first phase is speaks to understanding emissions and climate. I would summarize that largely as an assessment phase, and it is April through August.
Looks like we lost Covey.
It does appear so.
We can wait a bit.
Hopefully he'll log back in quickly.
I can take over if not.
Okay.
Oh, there's Kobe back.
I have no idea what happened there, and I literally was clicking nothing, but we're on with the show. Apologies for that. So, yes, WESC meetings, again, we'll keep you all in the loop, quote unquote, informally, such as meetings such as this, but there will be processes that are designed specifically for this audience to be a part of different activities and decision-making points. We will also have actually a couple of online, I would call them workshops or online meetings, where we will assess some of the information, of which as a teaser, you'll be exposed to during our meeting today and subsequent meetings. So again, it's a lot of assessment and then subsequent refinement and subsequent meetings. There will be a questionnaire that will be deployed to the community at large. And it kind of speaks to a point on a previous slide, is we would like to gather input and information from the community at large about their experiences, their behaviors, their perceptions with climate change and climate action. So how do they understand it? How do they experience it? Which will inform our activities and our processes and decision-making activities. Place-based outreach and engagement that really speaks to being out in the community or on the ground, and I guess technically virtually on online to deploy a lot of these activities. So you'll see my face out and about in your community doing that. And we also invite you all to participate in that, as well as give us advice and suggestions on when and where we should be. So that's what that speaks to, is largely, quite literally, the in-person outreach engagement that will take place. We'll also provide updates to Miami Valley's board at certain milestones to, of course, make sure that those stakeholder group is informed and supportive and informed of our work. And the online meeting number 2, as I referenced, largely it will refine a lot of the information that will be concept that will be covered in the first online meeting, and the first one, which will cover the CCAP process, an overview of the climate planning, as well as where we are in the outreach and engagement activities. So kind of an onboarding might be one way of thinking of it, kind of, sort of, and then meeting number 2 will be a refinement of a lot of the things that we've heard and learned from this group and the community at large. So the second phase goes into action planning. So I mentioned phase 1 is largely an assessment, kind of a learning phase, and phase 2 is based on those learnings, that information, that input that we have received. We go into actually planning what some of the plans, the plans and potential projects might look like. You see reference there, a workshop specifically for WESC. As I mentioned previously, we'll have specific engagement opportunities for you all. And we also have a working group, which I'll touch on slides here momentarily, a separate body that may have some overlap in terms of representation that will help inform and influence our activities. What those activities and that specific workshops will look like is really a facilitated conversation touching on concept regarding low carbon scenarios and actual action implementation. We will also have sector focus groups. So focus groups, which are facilitated conversations with groups that have something in common, essentially. And those will be based on respective sectors. As an example, perhaps businesses, environmental groups, public sector entities or bodies. And we'll do some more learning from them, as well as really kind of testing the waters in some regards regarding receptiveness to potential implementation of plans or projects. And we'll have something similarly regarding focus groups and for so-called climate justice communities as well. So a gist of this is that multiple audiences, multiple bodies, multiple groups throughout this engagement process will get multiple bites at the apple for us to learn from them, as well as for them to be engaged with decision-making processes, as well as action planning as well. And phase 3, if you can go back just one moment, I want to call out something, particularly with the timeline. This timeline goes through September. We kind of take a public-facing pause with some of the public-facing engagement afterwards, just to be cognizant of the general election. Some of you might have heard that that is happening this year. Many of these communities will be bombarded with a lot of activities. There'll be a lot of kind of cannibalism within them. We are not stopping activity. It's where a lot of what I would call behind the scenes activity will happen. But I want to call that out because I would notice that if I was seeing this information. So we're cognizant, respective of that. I've personally been involved in some of those nonpartisan activities right in your neck of the woods for a couple of cycles. And I know a lot of that pre-planning work was taking place about a year ago to plan for this fall. So that's something that we are cognizant of. And then, yes, but we're not stopping activity. It's just a matter of what is public facing. So I want to call out that timeline more than anything. And going on to phase 3 activities, that's where we do another summary of findings. So it's reconciling a lot of the information that we have learned and presenting that to various audiences, including a working group, which I'll touch on here momentarily. This body will have an opportunity to be exposed to a summary of the findings from the preceding activities, and then, of course, a final plan that will be presented to the Miami Valley Board. These activities will take place, this is more of the public-facing things that I mentioned before, in earnest in the new year, and go through late spring, or I guess technically early summer of 2025. As I mentioned, there's a working group that is, we're currently finalizing some of the planning processes for that. and it will be a collection or body of individuals who will primarily do the activities or will be invited to participate in the activities that you see in front of you, which include providing ongoing feedback and comments at key points. So they will kind of be our guides, our shepherds, our advisors, in many regards, our mentors to help assist us with a lot of the activities that I mentioned, inclusive of the technical analysis, and to help actually develop and refine the CCAP itself. They will also provide insights and help with the engagement processes that I mentioned. So they will be invited to do that. So very much not just hearing us talk and speak. We'll invite them to kind of roll up their sleeves and get their hands dirty as well and engage with their communities and their networks, which really speaks to that last bullet point there. So they will be engaged with not just the technical analysis aspects, but actually informing, influencing, and implementing the engagement processes itself within the greater community at large, but particularly within their respective networks. And this is an overview of the stakeholder groups that we are thinking through and whom we will invite to have some representation on the working group. That includes boards and commissions, business groups and associations, civic groups, educational institutions, nonprofits, policy and advocacy organizations, and public sector agencies. And our thinking with this is to be intentional about having many different voices and perspectives at the table in terms of groups that are, or entities or categories, as a one way to think of it, that are represented, so that we can get those as balanced perspectives as possible, as well as each of these bodies that you see in front of you, in many regards have different networks. There might be some overlap, but they have different networks based on the work that they do and the perspectives that they provide. So some of you may be involved in this process, not necessarily everyone. I want to give a full disclaimer there and full transparency. However, there are multiple ways to engage, even if it's not through this group formally. So I want to make that clear. Engagement is not about being exclusionary. There's just different opportunities to do so. So there'll be some of y'all will receive more information about this group and this activities, and we'll certainly directly will receive information about that. And we will certainly keep you abreast of the group's work and subsequent meetings and updates. And these are some opportunities for you all, not an all-inclusive list by any means, but as I mentioned a few times now, we will continuously provide updates and briefings such as we're doing now when we have formal FaceTime with you all. Momentarily, I will also drop a link to a microsite, which is a website that will be the public-facing, really an online hub is a way to think of it. I highly encourage each of you that are on this meeting now, as well as to spread the word to your other colleagues, to sign up at the least to receive updates about our activities. And that way, yeah, so that you'll remain in the loop even when we in the time periods between these meetings and other meetings. And you're encouraged to share information with us and through your networks. That is an open invitation to continuously do so. Kind of what is the word on the ground, word on the street, and we will. So it's a relationship of mutual communication, and we'll share things with you all, and we encourage you all to do the same. In terms of more formal opportunities for this body specifically, there will be a dedicated WESC online workshop, which was referenced in the previous slide, that is tentatively to happen later this summer, September 2024. I don't know about you, but that's light years for me away in my world. However, wanted to flag that for you all. And certainly as additional information and specifics in terms of scheduling happen, we will certainly keep you in the loop about that, as well as kind of a crown jewel of all of this work. The plan itself you all will be presented with a draft of that plan, potentially a year from now. Again, that's certainly light years, it's a couple light years away. But wanted to flag these, again, in the spirit of continuous transparency and multiple opportunities for you all, your networks, and the greater community at large to be engaged. I'll pause there to see if you all have any initial questions, reactions, or feedback. And as promised, I will drop the link to the microsite in the chat now, and highly encourage you all to, at the very least, sign up to receive ongoing updates and information about our work. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Kobe. I'm gonna have some few seconds to know if people have any questions. Okay. Yul, do you want to continue the scenario planning?
Sure. So we're slowly moving into the next phase of this project, which is developing scenarios for Miami Valley. And I'll give a bit of an overview as to how we're going to do that. And then we'll jump into a really exciting activity to start the development of those scenarios with all of you. And so if you go to the next slide, we are right now in the process of data collection. So we're building up a very detailed model of Miami Valley. And we're going to make that model line up with observed data so that all of the walking trips and energy consumption in buildings line up with the actual electricity consumption or natural gas consumption that is reported on by utilities. So that's the current process. And that model is basically a sandbox in which we can construct scenarios that envision the future for Miami Valley. And because so many different dimensions track on or impact energy and emissions, those scenarios are quite comprehensive in terms of defining land use projections, types of buildings, population growth, economic growth, types of energy used, the way people move around, green spaces. All of those are dimensions of scenarios for Miami Valley. So if we go to the next slide, to ground us in the current context, based on the analysis we did for the preliminary climate action plan, the PCAP, we identified a total of 11 million tons of emissions for Miami Valley, the majority of which come from the residential sector, about 5 million, followed by commercial institutional, and then last industrial. So those are the major sources of emissions that we need to take out. If we go to the next slide, we get a bit more resolution on where those come from. Much of them are based in electricity. So obviously, decarbonizing electricity is a key action here. The second largest source is mobile combustion, which is vehicles, and third largest is stationary combustion, which is natural gas, furnaces, hot water, so on within buildings. And then everything else is much, much smaller. So that's the context in which we're constructing scenarios. We want scenarios that address these sources of emissions. If you go to the next slide. So right now we're beginning to spec out those scenarios, and that is informed by the engagement process, also the technical analysis that we've done in the past. We develop those scenarios, and then we implement them in the model to understand what their actual impact on energy, emissions, costs, households, equity, and many other indicators are. So we're able to actually translate people's visions and aspirations into numbers and then iterate and adjust accordingly if we don't get the results that we're hoping for. And so we refine those scenarios, and then eventually we'll evaluate the scenarios against each other with you and others in the communities to get a final preferred scenario, which will become the pathway, the decarbonization or low carbon pathway for Miami Valley, which can then be adopted by municipalities and other organizations, and actions and policies can be developed to implement that pathway. Go to the next slide. So what is a scenario? Scenarios are super fun because you can envision futures without having to build anything, without having to spend any money, without having to really worry about negative consequences of any sort. So they essentially are stories, and a story can be very creative, very dynamic, very thoughtful. And the fun part is that once we have those stories, we can translate them into real numbers. And then you can actually see some of the implications of those stories in ways that are very difficult to think about in one person's mind. So because we have this comprehensive tool or model, we can really explore feedback cycles that would be really hard to just explore on if you simply are using the tool at hand, which is typically one's imagination and mind. So typically we're looking for plausible futures. So we do want to keep the emphasis on plausible, not feasible, because feasible is a very restricting concept, but more plausible. There is a good history of scenario planning already in Miami Valley, and we've discovered this project called Going Places, which, while there isn't much information still on Miami Valley or MVRPC's website, it seems like it was a very fascinating plan. So we're hoping to be able to leverage some of this work, in particular around land use planning, that was done in 2015. So I think that's a really interesting foundation on which we can build. So scenarios are used in all different contexts. I wanted to show also how scenarios are typically wrong, but they do allow us to think through different issues. And this is a really interesting example from the International Energy Agency of the projected uptake of solar PV year over year, starting in 2000 up till 2019. And this is the International Energy Agency scenarios. So this is what they thought the rate of scenario adoption would look like in 2000, 2002. And you can see they got it wrong every single year. And actually solar uptake has been going way faster than anyone at the IEA or many other agencies thought. So it's an example of how reality doesn't necessarily follow scenarios, but scenarios can really help us think through what the future looks like. You go to the next slide. So the steps that we are taking is identifying trends first, and we're doing that through the calibration process and reviewing many other different data sources on how people get around and energy sources and so on. We then identify key factors, and we can identify uncertainties around those factors, and we can start to parameterize those and define them as future scenarios. And a scenario is typically a bundle in our world, a bundle of different actions or projections in a coherent story. So we'll give some examples of what that looks like. We then model those scenarios and then identify the preferred scenario. So if you go to the next one. So when we're looking at trends, this is an example of the type of trend that we'll look at. What does the electricity system look like for Miami Valley, or the electricity system that Miami Valley accesses, and how is that projected to change in the future? This is just a report from yesterday that was released looking at renewable uptake, which now provides 30% of the world's electricity, which is a remarkable threshold, again, exceeding anyone's expectations. So that's the kind of trend that we can represent within the scenarios. What happens if renewable uptake goes much faster than anyone anticipates for Miami Valley? How does that impact the emissions, costs, equity issues, and so on? Next slide. We're looking at uncertainty for key factors. So this is a neat little grid that allows you to explore those dynamics. We typically focus on what we call more established technologies or certain bets, rather than uncertain or emerging technologies. And so if I give you the test on this spectrum, what is a technology that is can be certainly can reduce emissions? It's an established technology, and it's going to have a big impact. So it'd be the top right quadrant. Can anyone throw an example out there?
Heat pumps.
Right on. So heat pumps displace stationary combustion of natural gas, so they can have a big impact, and they're already being deployed everywhere in the world. So they're very certain to occur. Someone else want to say something that's less certain, would say, and might have a lower impact, that would fall in the bottom left quadrant?
Perhaps hydrogen fuel cell cars?
Yeah, I think that's a great example. So that's a fairly well-refined technology, but it's not deployed at scale at all right now. So it's uncertain to have a significant impact. Anyone else want to highlight any other examples and describe where they would put them?
Well, the high impact would definitely be electric vehicles in the Miami Valley and electric infrastructure.
Yeah. And would you say that's uncertain or certain?
Definitely certain.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly where I would put that as well. Any others? I'll show a couple more on the next slide, but this really allows us to think through. Oh, yeah, go ahead. To the next one. Think through what we call what is a risky bet versus a more certain opportunity, and we really want to focus on those certain opportunities. So solar panels, certain to occur, could have a significant impact. Remember, the major source of emissions is in Miami Valley's electricity. Nuclear, it's kind of happening, but kind of not. Projects are advancing, but also being canceled. So it's kind of uncertain. It could have a big impact, though. Carbon capture and storage, those projects are very uncertain, could have a fairly significant impact. Urban forests really could be a very clear possible strategy, but doesn't have a significant impact. So that's how we sort of map out different constituent components of scenarios. And then we can bundle all of these into sort of coherent stories. If you go to the next slide, this is an example of how we did this for another project. In scenario planning language, you typically don't want the name of the scenario to convey the nature of the scenario. And so in this case, we used endangered species to describe different decarbonization scenarios. And so one of the scenarios was a rapid decarbonization, so like no holds barred. Another one was that we don't have that much money, but we want to decarbonize as quickly as possible. So it's capital constrained. Another one is where technologies are going way faster than we anticipated. So each of those scenarios play out across multiple dimensions of the energy system and also other sources of emissions in a coherent story. And then you can argue about, well, is orca more likely, or is mountain caribou more likely or more desirable? Maybe Atlantic salmon is the most desirable. So that's kind of the paradigm that you get into in comparing the scenarios. And we can provide a lot of evidence around the impacts of each of those scenarios. So once we've identified the parameters we want to explore in the scenario, we then develop, or the concepts, then we develop parameters for those concepts. And we have a ton of levers that we can pull within the model. This is an example for, say, personal transportation. We can look at the number of trips, the length of trips, the number of people per vehicle, the efficiency of the vehicle, and the emissions factor of the vehicle. So in each of those cases, we can adjust. We can say, for emissions factor, maybe it's a gas or diesel or electric or biofuels, which impacts the emissions factor. The mix of the vehicles in the fleet also impacts the emissions factor. For efficiency, we can look at a bike or a bus or a car or a truck or walking. The number of people per vehicle we can influence by transit or incentives for car sharing or any other dimension. So we really have all of these levers at our hand in the model that we can explore different manifestations of the future. And this is just, we can give you at another point, perhaps an overview of all of the parameters, but there are literally thousands that we can pull, which Darren is the chief architect of. So once we sort of identified the scenarios, we then build out parameters for each of the dimensions of the scenarios. And so this is what it could look like in the end. You have the scenarios along the top, and then you have the different themes, demographics, land use, buildings, and it goes on and on down below, energy system, green space, and so on. And we fill out parameters that represent that particular scenario for that particular theme. So more rapid uptake of EVs, less rapid uptake of EVs, and so on. And then we translate that into the model and evaluate those scenarios. And the model is a very comprehensive spatial energy and emissions model, which allows us to understand all of those dynamics. And then we get all sorts of outputs. And so those outputs allow us then to choose a preferred scenario. And we typically use a process called multi-criteria analysis, where we score each scenario against criteria, and then we weight those criteria. So for example, greenhouse gas emissions reductions may be more important than quality of life improvement, or employment may be more important than resilience. So we can weight those criteria to highlight what are the most important attributes of the scenarios for Miami Valley. And some of the scoring is quantitative, so GHG emissions reduction, where some is qualitative, like impact on affordability. So
Great.
I'm going to pass it over to Fran.
Yeah, thank you. So now we do have this fun activity. Don't know how much time do we have left, Matt? Maybe
15 minutes.
Okay, that's more than okay. So the idea is that we actually begin to develop these scenarios, as you mentioned, with all of the introduction about the scenarios. So it's not going to be like the final output, the definition of the scenarios right now, but the idea is to introduce you to alternative scenarios, and we can explore also the type of futures that you would be interested in. So we're gonna share a Miro link in the chat. Just sharing right now. The idea is that you begin thinking about the scenarios. We have a question that you have to answer to give you like an playground of imagination. The idea is that you describe them qualitatively, so use your words to describe them, and to think about both desirable and plausible scenarios, but also undesirable too. What would you like not to be Miami Valley in the future? And also think about the region as a system in terms of its elements. This means that the Miami Valley, it's not only about population or cities, and the cities are composed of energy systems, forests, transportation, waste management, etc. And only if you have time, this is like a plus task, if you actually have an idea of potential targets for each scenario or time horizons, that would also be helpful. And I'm going to show you the questions. So to do this activity, you should answer this question. Is that, okay, you travel to the future and come back to 2024. So how would you describe Miami Valley to be to your grandchildren? And we want you to use then the post-its and begin to describe this as using the guidelines I just mentioned. Okay, then we're gonna leave you work on that. And at the end, I'm just going to mention this just in case we don't have much time. The idea is that after you describe that on your post-it, that you begin to place your post-it in the mirror. There's a table showing these 4 quadrants, and the idea is you place the post-it for the scenario on each of the grids. Does anybody have any question? We're going to leave you to work
It looks
then.
like some people have managed to get in, but perhaps not everyone. So we could also share the Miro board and help anyone if they're having trouble getting in.
Yep. Sure.
Or if you're having trouble with post-it notes, or if you haven't used Miro or are nervous about it, we can type for you as well.
Yeah, so this is how it looks, the mirror. So the questions here is in orange, and some of the guidelines are next to it. So you go and pick any of the places where the participants are and choose any post-it, and you can just double click and then begin to write. To move around the mirror, just click on the right click of the mouse, and you can go wherever you want. Just to pick your post-it, just click on the left click of the mouse and then move your post-it to wherever you want to. And also, if you prefer to send us maybe messages on here on the chat on private, maybe to you or me or Kobe or even Darren, we can write for you and do the activity.
Does anyone need help? Looks like we have quite a cohort of experienced Miro users.
Wise participants. So we can work on this for about 5 minutes, and then I'm just going to read a few of the ideas just randomly. Just a heads up that we're gonna keep this mirror open. So if you still wanna add some ideas after the meeting, you're very welcome to do it. Okay, in time, so just to respect everybody's time, just gonna read some of them. We have preserve green spaces, bike friendly, all in the certain to occur but low impact. This is very similar to what actually you presented. Advancing existing tech. Not sure if you can give some example of which one are you thinking? 'Cause I'm thinking of many. Maybe we're not thinking of the same one. Regional flood protection system, walkable cities and villages, accessible parks and natures. On the other quadrants, we have 50% of passenger vehicles are hybrids or better. Several acreage of adjacent acreage now dedicated to solar collection. It's a good one. More centralized condensed planning, more mobility options, energy efficient buses and fleet vehicles. And on the not certain quadrants, we have solar energy widespread, I'm guessing a lot of generation, reestablishing environmental corridors, more local micro renewable electricity production, green buildings, and low impact. We'd have collaboration among governments, more preserved farmlands, and local food systems. Okay, thank you, everybody. As I mentioned, you still have this open. If you would be more describe, if you would like to describe a bit more on each of these actions, that's also helpful to design the scenarios. Just to moving back to the next steps. So the idea is that we review the scenario inputs, and some of these are input for the scenario planning process. Then we will develop a scenario table as similar to what Jules already showed, with a lot of parameters and specific numbers for those parameters. And we'll have a different stages of revising these scenarios and evaluating them as modeling itself. And finally, we of course will present the draft of the results and have some feedback according to these results. Is there anything else you would like to add, Kobe or Yul?
I can see a green Miami Valley, green in the vegetation sense, being a one key theme in a scenario. And then it seems like land use and mobility are two other interesting themes to consider based on just quickly looking at these comments.
Yeah, nothing from me. As Fran mentioned, if there's anything else that you'd like to include, feel free to use the chat as well to add or further explain anything that you might have included in the Miro, but nothing else from me now.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you all. We're right up against 11 o'clock. The next scheduled meeting for this WESC group will be in September. We skipped July. But as Kobe mentioned, some of you and others will be hearing about an invitation to consider participating in that working group that will be providing a lot of expertise, feedback, and effort for the engagement process within the comprehensive climate action planning process. So we're right up at 11. I thank you all for attending. Have a good rest of your day.
You too. Bye.